Hey there, welcome or welcome back. Only True Democracy and Talk, second half of this hour. I'm Leslie Marshall. Like I said, welcome or welcome back. And we welcome for the first time to the program, Director for the Food Processing Division for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. We have Jesse Case joining us. And Jesse, tens of thousands of Teamsters across the continent are members of the union's growing food processing division. This division represents many classifications of worker. That includes production line workers, mechanics, forklift drivers, machine operators, and much more. Now, they help prepare, process, and move just about every kind of food that you and I find at the grocery store. This is meats, the dairy, vegetables, fruits, grains, pretty much everything that we eat. If you want more information on this, once we've talked to Jesse today and you want to find out more because you can only fit so much in 30 minutes, visit teamster.org for more information, a plethora of information on that website. Now, follow them also on X and on Instagram. Their handle on both is @Teamsters. Like them on Facebook at facebook.com/Teamsters. And find the Teamsters Cannabis Workers online by visiting linktr.ee/Teamsters_420. That's linktr.ee/Teamsters_420. Jesse, thank you for joining us today. Welcome and good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I live in California where, as a matter of fact, Mark Wahlberg, who I know that President O'Brien likes to, talk to about the workouts that they do. And a Bostonian like myself, President O'Brien, Mark Wahlberg jokingly said, "Don't become an actor if you want to get rich out here in California. Open up a cannabis dispensary." Well, there are more and more cannabis workers that are joining the Teamsters Union, and that represents now over 1,000 cannabis workers in 6 different states. Tell us about this, because this is yet another area of the workforce that, people say, hey, we need to unionize. We need a union representing us. We need somebody to have our backs against these big, huge corporations. We can't fight it on our own. We can't do it on our own.
Yeah, currently there are around 400,000 workers in the cannabis space. Most other workers, they keep the companies open. They're looking for the same securities in a growing industry. We don't want just cheap labor in cannabis jobs. We want careers out of these jobs. And a lot of cannabis companies are making millions and millions of dollars. It's a precarious industry right now, but it's a transitional industry. And the only thing that brings stability to the industry is the workers. When they go to work every day, they need the same protections as other workers, whether that's job security through a grievance and arbitration process, seniority rights, health and safety items, and other typical items that other workers enjoy in other industries.
Why do you think there's so many cannabis workers joining the Teamsters right now?
Well, I think cannabis workers, not unlike workers in the brewery industry 100 years ago who were coming out of prohibition, are being taken advantage of in many areas throughout the country. It's a relatively new industry. Employers are figuring it out. The government's figuring it out. States are figuring it out. But workers are going to work every day to keep these businesses open, and they're realizing that they need the same protections as other workers in other industries. Without the employers, the workers don't have a job, but without the workers, that cannabis product isn't moving out the door. So it's a partnership between the workers and the owners, just like any other industry.
You touched upon careers, right? And how people are making careers out of and can make long-term careers out of cannabis industry positions. Can you tell me the role that the Teamsters Union plays in helping to create those careers in this industry long-term?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want these to be fast food jobs where it's a transitional job and a temporary job. A lot of people working in this industry are trying to support families. Workers, again, like other workers in other industries, need good wages. They need a wage that they can support themselves and their families on. They need benefits. They need a retirement. They need pensions. They need 401ks. They need health insurance. And they need the ability to sit across the table from their employer and negotiate wages, hours, and conditions of employment like every other worker has in the country. So we're really bringing, stability to the industry, and workers work in this industry because they're passionate about cannabis. That this is a culture. You don't go work in a cannabis dispensary or grow house if you don't feel passionately about cannabis. And we think if you feel passionately about the career you're working in, they should be exactly that, careers. We don't want 400,000 temporary employees in any industry. And this is going to grow to be 2 million jobs in the coming decade. So it's really
Wow.
important to set standards right now at kind of the ground level.
Yeah, it is a growing field. When you say that number 2 million, that's astounding, but it's also wonderful. You just think about how many more jobs are available and job creation. And really good point that you make. It's not like just anybody goes to work. In this industry at one of these facilities. Yeah, there is a passion to it. It is almost like a segment of our society. Um, One of the things that I love about the Teamsters is, in addition to fighting for decent wages and health care and pensions, you guys fight for safety. And there are so many people, sadly, with corporate greed that have lost their lives on the job or their livelihood because they were injured. The list goes on. I would imagine that safety is a concern in the cannabis industry as well. Can you tell us if that's true and why?
It is true, and here's why: is because if you have a large grow operation in the agricultural sector, you're dealing with in this industry a lot of mold and mildew. You're dealing with powdery mist in the air. You're dealing with N95 masks and hazmat suits. And if any of those components are missing, the masks that aren't being replaced in a timely fashion, or if there just aren't hazmat suits and you're getting that mist and that mold on your clothes and carrying it home, that's a real health risk to not only yourself but the people in your household. So then there are other just regular, forklift issues that you see in other industries and warehouses and other industries. So if the fork trucks don't have good brakes, that's a safety hazard within the warehouse. And just because the product is cannabis as opposed to car parts doesn't mean that it's not a health and safety issue. So there are a lot of issues that are unique to this industry, health and safety wise. And then there are some health and safety issues that are just common, regardless of the industry, because it's a warehouse or a grow environment.
We all want security, job security. And especially, right now we see a lot in the headlines like, this plant lays off or this company lays off or federal government's laying off. But job security is definitely an issue, a big issue in the cannabis industry. Can you tell us why? Because I don't think people would think that job security is a concern in this industry.
Yeah, and as I said, it's a very precarious time for the industry, and companies kind of come and go, and there are some large major players in the industry, and then there are a lot of mom and pops in the industry, like other industries. But it's the workers who are keeping these businesses open when they are open, and in order to make them careers, people need some stability, just like any other industry. If you go to work and dedicate your life to your employer, you should have basic human and labor rights: the right to just cause for discipline, the right to a grievance and arbitration process, the right to negotiate your wages, hours, and working conditions. And that's what makes temporary jobs turn into careers, when people feel the stability on the job that really makes an okay job into a good job where you want to stay and make a career out of.
Absolutely. You talk to the workers in various industries, in food service, you talk to workers in the cannabis industry. And, I would imagine people vent their frustrations or tell you their concerns. What would you say are some of the other big issues that you hear from these workers in this industry, in the cannabis industry?
Well, along with the ones I just mentioned, which is job security with
Mhm.
just cause for discipline and a grievance and arbitration process, which is what makes a union workplace different than a non-union workplace, where everyone's at will, they're hired at will, they're fired at will, policies change at will. In a union environment, employees have that job security where the employer can still discipline them, but they need just cause for discipline. In the cannabis industry, Agricultural workers have been exempt from the National Labor Relations Act going back to the 1930s. And so, a lot of people in the cannabis industry are obviously agricultural workers who don't have traditional rights to organize. And they need the same rights as everybody else in the American workforce. So we're fighting for agricultural workers in the cannabis industry to have the right to have a union, to have the right to negotiate wages, hours, and working conditions. And just because they were exempt from the National Labor Relations Act doesn't mean they shouldn't have that basic right to organize a union. And we're not going to abandon those workers, and we're fighting for them every day.
And as well you should. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back. It's a fundamental right to unionize, fundamental right for that union to sit down and have a collective bargaining session at the table with these large corporations. Jesse Case, director for the Food Processing Division for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, is with us. We'll be back with him and you right after this. We are back. We are me, Leslie Marshall, and Jesse Case. Mr. Case is director for the Food Processing Division for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Have you missed me giving the information as to where you can find more information, not just about this, but that everything that Teamsters do? Maybe you're in an industry that wants to unionize, or maybe you want to find out more to have a union like the Teamsters to back you, to stand in the gap for you and fight your battles against those big corporations. They've got a big team, and you always want that behind you, right? Visit teamster.org for more information. Follow them on X and on Instagram, same handle there at Teamsters. Like them on Facebook at facebook.com/Teamsters. And we're talking about the cannabis workers. You can find those Teamsters cannabis workers online. Just go to linktr.ee/Teamsters_420. That's linktr.ee/Teamsters_420. Mr. Case, thank you for holding, and welcome back. We've talked about why the cannabis workers in this industry are joining the Teamsters. We've talked about creating long-term careers in this industry and how the Teamsters can help with that, not just in this industry, in every safety concerns within the cannabis industry, job security within the cannabis industry, and other things that you're hearing from workers in the cannabis industry. I know that the Teamsters have lobbied, and people that, have the pulse of what's going on with unions and, just paying attention to the news, that Teamsters have lobbied for a number of cannabis related bills. There's been a lot of legislation in, current years with this industry, growing and growing so fast. And this is legislation not just at the national level, but at the state level as well. Can you speak to us about some of these cannabis related bills that the Teamsters have lobbied on behalf of?
Yeah, and federally, cannabis needs to be rescheduled. It needs to be decriminalized, and that could be done very easily. Majority of Americans support it, and it's just a matter of the elected officials having the fortitude to carry out the will of the people. So the first thing is to decriminalize it, reschedule it, and take that burden off employers who are trying to make a run at this industry. Clemency, pardons, and for nonviolent convictions needs to happen. There's no reason why we should have so many people in prison in an industry or for a product that's now in the process of being decriminalized. And we need to expunge their records so they can go out and get jobs and get their lives back. We also need to reform tax laws and banking laws so these employers have a shot, just like other small businesses. If you're saddled by a different set of laws, either in the banking industry or the tax industry that other small businesses have, that's wrong. So we need to reform not only the schedule, how it's scheduled federally, but reform the tax laws and the banking laws so businesses have a shot at success when they enter the space.
It's interesting that you bring up, mandatory minimums. You're absolutely right with regard to, prisons. I mean, I think most people would agree we want violent offenders, in our prisons. We don't want somebody who, had, a few joints in a Ziploc bag sitting there taking up space, costing so much money, and they're not a threat to society. You never hear, somebody smoked a joint and went in and shot up everybody in the library. It just doesn't happen. Also, we have growing. Like you said, the support is out there. I mean, the numbers are there. So to that point, why do you think it becomes such a cog in the wheel for some politicians because this is the will of the people.
I think it's just a matter of them not understanding and not prioritizing doing what's right. There's no reason why people should be locked up. If you got caught with public intoxication, you won't get a 20-year conviction.
Correct. Absolutely.
It's just insane, and it's a throwback to a different era where people demonized a product that's now being legalized. Just like as I said 100 years ago, if somebody were thrown in prison for bootlegging and they got a 40-year sentence and then it became decriminalized, why are those people in prison? And that's what's happening today. It's the equivalent of the end of prohibition.
Yeah.
It's the right thing to do. If politicians are against it, they're on the wrong side of not only history but the American people. They need to look at clemency. They need to look at expunging people's records. They need to look at pardons. And on that same note, they need to give agricultural workers the other big federal law, or even on a state level, some states have passed laws to give agricultural workers the right to organize a union. And this is another example of a growing industry where workers need rights, and we need to see more laws passed to give agricultural workers the right to organize.
Absolutely. And we're seeing more and more states pass legislation. Even, some red states have medicinal marijuana legalization. And of course, you see those purple and blue states that say medicinal and recreational use. This isn't going away. Like you said, there's going to be more and more workers. And, we need to get those people out of prison. And we do need, like you said, the agricultural industry to be treated fairly like any other industry and have the right to unionize. A lot of cannabis workers are ineligible for union membership. Some people watching and listening to us right now might be going, I don't understand. I hear what you're saying. So why are they ineligible for union membership? Can you tell us a little bit about that? And can you also tell us what, you and the Teamsters are doing to change it?
Yeah, in the 1930s, when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, that gave workers in America the right to organize a union, they exempted agricultural workers and domestic workers. And not coincidentally, those were industries that were heavily employed by people of color, so and women. So they gave white men the ability to organize a union to improve their standards, and then people of color and women who were housekeepers and working in the fields didn't get that same right. Well, now it's 100 years later, and it's time to correct that mistake too. And without correcting that and without giving agricultural workers the right to organize, then we're left with nowhere to file for an election like other workers have. The way the law works is if a majority of workers or a third of the workers file a showing of interest, they can file for an election. And if a secret ballot election determines that a majority of workers want to bargain, they have that right. With agricultural workers, there's nowhere to file for that election because they're exempt. So that leaves workers with one other option, and that's to strike. So the system is set up to push agricultural workers in the cannabis industry towards a strike, which adds instability to an already unstable industry. And what the Teamsters are trying to do is bring stability to that precarious industry. When the federal laws are bad and the tax laws are bad and the banking laws are bad and businesses are coming and going, whether they're large multi-state operators or mom and pops, what's consistent is the workforce. And we're trying to bring consistency to this industry and these companies who need a little consistency and a little help that they're not getting from the federal government. The Teamsters can help supply that consistency.
And this would definitely be progress. It would be moving forward. Why is this important to the future of the entire labor movement? Because this is a game changer.
Well, it's wrong to have a whole industry unorganized, and I hate to keep going back to the 1930s, but imagine in the 1920s when alcohol was illegal,
Yeah.
and then 100 years later we have hundreds of thousands of people working in that industry, supplying, putting bread on the table for their families, paying the mortgage, paying the car payments, sending their kids to college, and imagine if those people didn't have the right to organize. Cannabis workers, you're going to see 2 million people working in this industry in the next decade, and that's a lot of households in America. That's a lot of workers that are going to be working to support their families and themselves. This is important because agricultural workers in America need the right to organize. If you're working in a cannabis industry, you need the right to organize. In a dispensary, you need the right to organize. And it's important that all Americans have the right to join and form a union, regardless of what industry they're in. So it's indicative. If we're fighting cannabis workers from organizing, it's not unrelated to giving other workers rights. Right. It's the American worker needs a shot at leveling the playing field, and the only way to do that is through collective bargaining.
What's next for the Teamsters in the cannabis industry?
Well, we're rolling out national programs to give workers' rights and bring workers' rights to this industry. We're seeing a rapid expansion of workers organizing in the space from coast to coast and in the Midwest. So I think we're going to continue to see the Teamsters ramping up this industry because the industry is ramping up. We're going to see the Teamsters on the forefront of not only worker advocacy, but employer advocacy in terms of changing those laws that are hindering them right now.
There are people watching or listening that say, hey, I'm working in the cannabis field. How do I get in on this? People interested in the cannabis industry, cannabis workers who are interested in joining the Teamsters, how would they find out more?
Teamster.org, or contact your local Teamster office in your town.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. You were awesome. We'll have to have you back. Your Virgin Voyage was awesome, Mr. Case. Jesse Case, Director for the Food Processing Division for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. As he said, if you want to find out more, go to their website, teamster.org. And then also on X, on Instagram, they have information there. Follow them there at Teamsters. Like them on Facebook at facebook.com/Teamsters. And to find the Teamsters cannabis workers online, here you go directly. Go to this link, linktr.ee/Teamsters_420. That's linktr.ee/Teamsters_420. I'm Leslie Marshall for Mr. Case and our executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. Thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful and safe weekend and fight for workers to have the freedom to unionize. That's the American way.